and dear friend, distinguished guests, a little delay, but for reasons there are certain things of our before when we met, foggy, and we had only 15 minutes. You see a little bit of land here. That when the flag out, Swiss Alps, the maybe the fresh that no rains or perhaps land out of the window. Competitive. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud that once again Globsec can provide a platform and space for the debate on the future of Europe, here in the heart of Central Europe. And I would like to thank to all of our partners who have supported us, because without their partnership and their support, it would be impossible. You see them on the both sides of the room, but first of all, Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic, Mr. Peter Kažimír, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, Mr. Lajčák, but also Google, EPH, Eustream, Philip Morris, Slovnaft, and many others who have supported us for years. So thank you very much. I wish you fruitful debates. I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Ivan Korčok is one of the founding fathers of Globsec here. Ivan, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, ministers, dear members of the Commission, distinguished guests. Every time when we meet here at Tatra Summit, many ask me why are you organizing this and why all the whole event of Tatra Summit, and I can tell you very often I'm asking myself. And that remembers me of the moment when the whole idea of this event of Tatra Summit was born. That was back in summer 2011, when three of us, Robert Vaš, who spoke before me, and Rastislav Káčer, we met back then in my residence in Brussels, and that was on the peak or amidst the Euro crisis, when we all in Europe were down and the future of Europe was uncertain, and many were even projecting that Euro first and Euro will fall apart. And in that depressive moment, we felt that we lack here in Central Europe a discussion, a platform, an event where we can get together both business and politicians and thinkers to discuss issues which impact Europe, but which impact severely and heavily Central Europe as well. When I look back at those 7 years, I think the rationale behind Tatra Summit is still valid. I think there are rather more questions than answers that we are having since 2011. And therefore I'm glad that this is the 7th year of Tatra Summit, and I hope we can discuss those pertinent issues. And second, I can tell you we do this in order to present this country. I'm Slovak diplomat. I've been dealing with European affairs for last 10 years, and we do this in order to have many of you discovered this country, which I think is a beautiful country, which is very pro-European. And therefore, I hope that many of you who are here for the first time to experience this event, that will be an invitation for you to come back again. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, I hope those two reasons, as I said, are still here in place and valid, and I thank you all for coming. We are impressed by your participation, your interest, and I hope you will enjoy this event. Thank you very much. I forgot. I'm sorry. I'd like to invite now Vasil Hudak, the Vice President of European Investment Bank. He was with us from the very first moment when the idea was born, and he is now enjoying his life in Luxembourg. So the floor is yours. Unlike me.
Thank you. I think coming from Luxembourg, you can be only jealous of this kind of background and nature and beauty, although I'm Slovak, so of course this is my country and I'm very happy to be here. When we started the Tatra Summit, we, since the very beginning, thought this should focus on V4. V4 because we believe that this could be a positive force for Europe. And this whole discussion today, tomorrow, is about how to make V4 a positive engine for the European development, innovation, and for more stability and integration. We had very interesting discussion today with the ministers of finance about, for example, creating so-called V4 investment platform, because what these countries need is also more connectivity. How to bring them closer, how to build what is now being called the fast railway connection between the capitals of the V4 countries, and how to make sure that people in these countries can benefit from the integration, not only within the European space, but also regional space. Connectivity, based on our calculations at the European Investment Bank in this region, would require over 500 billion euro to get it to the level of the Western Europe. It's a lot of money. It cannot be done only with public money. It needs private sector. And that's why we are very happy to have here private sector leaders who have to work, and we need to develop this cooperation with governments to make things happen. As you know, EIB has developed such platforms, such cooperation, especially through implementation of the Juncker plan. And I wanted to thank the leaders from the countries of V4, France, Germany, of being big supporters of the European Investment Bank in doing so. So I want to finish this introduction now because I feel like when you have these concerts of stars, you know, there are first little singers who just prepare the grounds for the main singer. And the person, he's also special to me because I got to know him in 2012 when I joined Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic as a state secretary. And we are kind of collected by Peter Kažimír, who used to be our boss at that time as the minister, and created this kind of trio who tried to manage Slovak public finance during the time of crisis. And I think we all remember the time when we joined and it was deficit over 8%. We had to cut everything. We were very unpopular in Slovakia. And I think some of the business partners here would remember the time when there were heavy discussions. And I was always impressed by Peter Pellegrini, who was then the state secretary of the Ministry of Finance and had to negotiate the budgets and the cuts. And he did it with a charm, with professionalism, and with a way which I think left people understanding that this has to be done for the good of the country. Now he's in a different position, much more important position, and I'm very happy that we have such a leader in Slovakia. So without more ado, I would like to introduce the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Peter Pellegrini. Please, Peter.
Thank you very much, Vasil, for your words. And you mentioned that big singers, it's not me. After my speech, there will come other bigger singers into the stage, so I'm also only preparing this atmosphere for all of you. And really, this year we tried to do our best, and we really organized such a weather for you. I hope we made not a mistake, because I hope you will be able to concentrate yourself still during the next hours and days. And it is for me a great honor to be here as a Prime Minister, and that I have the chance to speak with you, because there are so many important people in this room, and it is for us always a great honor that we can host such a person here in Slovakia. Dear Secretary General, dear commissioners, dear ministers, distinguished audience and Globsec friends, ladies and gentlemen, today we are kicking off the 7th edition of the Tatra Summit, and I am pleased to see that this challenging event has grown to become a real landmark on the map of the influential European conferences. Now more than ever, we need brand new ideas to shape the world. We need dialogue between those who decide and those who feel the consequences of those decisions. And the Tatra Summit is the perfect place for such a dialogue. Just take a technology as an example. It's accelerating our life, our social interactions, the way we do business, and the way we create policies. Recently, I spoke to employees in one of our biggest car producer, and the people are very worried, and they asked me these kind of questions. Will we lose our jobs if robots replace us, or they will take our jobs in our factories, or what it means when we speak about artificial intelligence? And maybe I saw some smile on your faces, but we need really to treat such questions really serious. We need to know the exact implication of progress and be prepared for them. That is why fora like Tatra Summit are important. Good ideas have been born here in the past, so we often tend to say also today, good idea, Slovakia. To generate these new ideas and solutions, we also need advice and expertise from abroad, borrowing from the Beatles with a little help of my friends. And one of these very good friends is the OECD Secretary General, Angel Gurria, who is now with us here. And we have been in close touch these days with him because, as you all know, Slovakia is working on the priorities for the upcoming chairmanship of the OECD in 2019. And our country is committed to put a high emphasis on digitalization and its transformational impact at the next year's ministerial. So once more, Angel, it is so good to have you here today. Please, welcome. The European Commission also has a strong presence here in this room, and I'm very happy to welcome Honorable Competition Commissioner, Madam Margaret Vestager. Welcome. As well as our very own Maroš Šefčovič. Maroš, welcome home again. I'm also glad that this conference has no shortage of finance ministers. There are Visegrad 4 finance ministers. They are Austrian, French, and German colleagues as well, and we are truly honored. And I'm thankful to Peter Kazimir for attracting the crème de la crème of ECOFIN today. As we move to discuss the pertinent topics of today, finance ministers should be the ones to find the good and sustainable solutions, but not always, because I know how ministers of finance are dealing with things. I had the chance to work with Peter for 2 years as his deputy minister, and I don't know what they did to me. They gave me probably some special pill because I'm a very optimistic person, and I'm a very helpful person. But the 2 years which I spent there, I was a completely other person. I was just cutting, saying no to everything, and I don't know what happened, but they know how to do it. But I have to say he's doing a great job in Slovakia, and really, he introduced only 1 day before, I think, the best budget of Slovak Republic in our history, and we are really thankful that we have already 6 or 7 years at the Ministry of Finance, Peter. But we have to continue, and we have to speak also about some other figures. And because this conference is about numbers, I would like to speak about some numbers and figures of Slovakia. Because Slovakia has been experiencing very favorable economic performance with a real GDP per capita growing at around 3% per year over the past 5 years. Wages continue to grow and investments have also picked up. The unemployment rate is at a historical minimum of 5.5%, and the economic growth is predicted to hit 4.1% in 2018, also thanks to investments in the public sector and automotive industry. In short, Slovakia is a Convergence success story, and I have to say we are performing really well, and I hope and I think we are living the best times in our history since we start to exist alone without our Czech brothers 25 years ago. But we do not rest on our laurels. However, we realize that our current economic model is on its last legs and cannot take us much more further. Coupled with the ongoing digital transformation, we are aware of the need to change and evolve. A lot of work is ahead of us. We aim for nothing less than transformation of the Slovak economy to respond to market needs. We seek to transform Slovakia into a knowledge-driven economy that can adapt to the needs of this fast-changing world. Let me entertain the topic of digital transformation a little bit longer, as it is, and rightfully so, at the center stage of what you are about to hear and discuss for the next 2 days. Digital transformation brings about both opportunities as well as challenges. Digitization produces new forms of business models and markets. The potential to tackle multiple policy objectives, the ones is literally at our fingertips with mobile apps, intelligent self-learning, algorithms, and big data. And this potential is really endless. Slovakia follows an ambitious plan of the European Union to boost its digital and data economy. On the national level, we are preparing the updated digital strategy that will define particular activities within the cross-cutting sector of digital agenda. Most importantly, we want to leverage the potential of innovative technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, IoT, and others. It is obvious that going digital for our economy and society will have a vast impact on us all as well. We assume that growing data sector can help to diversify our economy, which now heavily depends on automotive industry. If we succeed with our general goal to establish new R&D centers and expand existing business models, we believe that it will not only stop outflow of the best graduates from the country, but it will also attract the Slovaks living abroad and working for high-tech companies around the globe to come back home again. Moreover, we need to prepare systematically for the new multi-annual financial framework. As declared by the Commission, digital agenda will be one of the top priorities when it comes to funding. Based on the initial proposal, the chief funding program called Digital Europe will be established with the aim to invest billions of euros to align with increasing digital challenges in high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, digital skills, and digital technologies. Therefore, we, the politicians, need to utmost the draft meaningful project that will boost research and development in order to innovate for the benefits of all. With all this in mind, we need to make sure that the transformation benefits us all, ensuring that the big players don't abuse market advantage and pay their fair share of taxes, that the SMEs and also the most vulnerable parts of society are not going to be left behind. All these need an active attention and efforts of the governments in order to drive the change in a prosperous way. It should be our goal to seize the opportunities and transform the challenges into further opportunities to grow and for well-being of all parts of our society. Slovakia, as the country with the highest number of produced cars in the world per capita and with a significant share of renewable resources, has to keep pace with trends towards exploiting its innovation potential in the automotive sector. Batteries, both for electromobility and for energy storage, are the focus of the ongoing industrial revolution. Successful production of powerful batteries is a must, but also our commitment in clean energy. As a Prime Minister, I'm supporting every good idea and initiative to fulfill our international commitments, but also those proving that Slovakia can be a good engine of the Danube Innovation Valley. I am pleased that we are all today witnessing the launch of the Slovak Battery Alliance, which has just been inaugurated by Commission's Vice President Maroš Šefčovič, Vice President of the EIB, my colleague Vasil Hudak, and our Deputy Prime Minister Peter Kažimír, with intention to develop an innovative, sustainable, and competitive ecosystem for the batteries industry. Alliance is a newcomer in the Slovak scene. Let's wish all the best and may bring ideas to all stakeholders behind this project. Creating all these opportunities requires effective and efficient multilateral cooperation. That's why I welcome very much initiatives like OECD's Going Digital or numerous multidisciplinary expert groups established by the European Commission. Despite that rather volition we see today, I remain optimistic. We see the mixed blessing of digitization is in the transcends national borders. In the end, nothing short of a truly global solution will be enough. And now, let me stop here, and I'm saying really that I'm very happy to recognize so many faces here in this room. I hope you will enjoy our beautiful Slovakia. You will enjoy our beautiful mountains. You will enjoy this great organized conference. Thank you to you for organizing such an event, because it's really also about presentation of our country. I have to say, and I will use this opportunity because the second speaker is now in the United States as our new ambassador, so I wish you all the best there. We hope you will do a lot for us there. And now I will leave this stage, and because I'm the Prime Minister, I can decide about my time, and probably I will come only in the night for the perfect event which is organized by Peter with great musicians, and so I'll see you there later. Ciao.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your inspirational speech. And we are having the next point on our agenda, so we are continuing without a break. So I would like to invite to the floor Jennifer Baker, independent EU policy journalist, and Margaret Vestager, European Commissioner, and after that, Mr. Daniel Křetínský. Thank you very much.
Jennifer, where do you want me?
Here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And we're recording. Thank you again very much, Prime Minister, for your speech and your warm welcome in this beautiful setting and for hosting us. Now, it says here, introduce the Commissioner, but I'm pretty sure I don't need to do that. Everyone in the room knows who you are. What this panel is going to be about is EU entrepreneurial ecosystem and whether it's creating or curbing competition. Now, as any good tech journalist does, yesterday I decided to crowdsource my questions to you today. Yes. So I went on Twitter and I asked the world what they wanted me to ask you today. And you would think I would get some terrible suggestions, but actually I got some very sensible questions. And you know, the main thing that people are asking is, what is the future of competition? What does good competition look like to you?
Well, good competition is what is serving customers well. That we can enjoy affordable prices, choice among different qualities, but also innovation. Because competition is a great driver of innovation. And both when we as citizens are there in the role as consumers, but also I think as citizens in this continent and within our union, competition will serve as well, because Europe obviously needs to stay in the absolute high end of the value chain. And if we are to do that, well, then we need to keep innovating. And in that, competition is a very good thing. Also because I think it's important that if you want to innovate, especially if you're a small business or a medium-sized business, then you need to be able to trust the marketplace, that you have a fair chance of making it. Because if you find that the bigger guys, they are above the law, that they can do whatever, then how to find the courage to invest yourself, your resources, your knowledge, into producing something new?
Well, you say innovation, and it might sound very cynical, but we hear in Brussels all the time this phrase, don't stifle innovation. And often, you know, when I hear that, what I hear is, oh, just let us do whatever we want and make money. I mean, that breeds a sort of atmosphere of distrust for companies, does it not?
Well, I think that Europe has shown how a European approach has made us all very rich. It's a very prosperous continent. Just look at our host country today. Since the EU membership, I think the gap from being about 50% of EU average, next year it will be just slightly over 80%. And I think of the 12 countries in the Union that will grow the most, the next year, the Visegrad countries obviously are among them, but so are all the countries that has come into the Union most recently. So this European way of doing things, where there is a very good and close relationship between competition and regulation, That creates, on the one hand side, the trust, but on the other hand side, also the drive.
Well, I mean, we hear a lot, obviously, the big cases that are, always in the headlines are those big tech companies, and they are predominantly American. And you've been sick to death, I'm sure, of being accused of being anti-American, but can you at least address that? Because it comes up again and again.
Yes, and I take that very seriously, because it's one of the sort of the very fundamentals of our European Union that we put equal treatment into real life. It's not a theory. It's not just in our textbook. But equal treatment, no matter what flag you're flying as a company, if you're a newcomer to the union or you're a founding member, if you have opt-outs like my own home country, if you're a small country or a big country, if you're private or publicly owned. So I always take that very seriously. And if you then go through our work, you'd find that that it's not being a US company or a European company. Of course, we enforce much more with European companies. Lately, also, we had a big case with Gazprom where we have imposed binding commitments to allow prices to come down. So I think we can fend for ourselves. The thing is more that since we're in a technological, digital revolution, and I don't think we have seen it all. These first decade may just be sort of the dress rehearsal for quantum computing and blockchain, as the Prime Minister just mentioned. There will be more. And since these are formative years, of course, the companies who are the first to harvest network effects, marginal costs approaching zero, of course, there is a focus on what they're doing, because we are now forming our societies to be digital.
Well, before we sort of dive into specific cases, let me ask you about the question of size, because the cases that you end up taking on tend to be around issues of dominance, which by nature means they're large. But SMEs make up 99% of the EU economy. So where does competition play a role when you're thinking of that sector?
Well, let me offer two perspectives. One is, of course, that if you're a smaller business in a national market, the National Competition Authority will make sure that you're not faced with competitors who, for instance, cartelize or have decided to do things that they shouldn't in misusing maybe a national dominant position. And I think this is very important, and sometimes I wonder if this model could not be used in other areas as well, where we have a strong competence within the Commission, but we work completely integrated with our national competition authorities who actually enforce the same legislation. But to do that on ground, to make sure that consumers in retail, in construction, in some of the national markets are well protected. Second thing is that if you look at the European business structure, of course we have gigantic companies, but we also have a lot of companies who are completely dependent on the network of small and medium-sized businesses. And that gives both a stability and a flexibility that is unheard of in economic zones where you are dominated by giant businesses. So it's not just for sort of the festive occasions, it is for real that the medium and small-sized businesses, they create the jobs, they take the young people on board for apprentices, they pay their taxes. So obviously for us it is important to keep the market open for them to do their business because they are an enormous contributor, probably one of the most important to European prosperity.
Well, the other area now I want to get on to is it's very tech-heavy, which is my bread and butter, so I'm very happy about that. You've talked a bit about the idea of data as a commodity. Sort of lay out how that would work, because even relatively small in terms of employee companies might be processing an absolutely enormous amount of data, and you get into an awful lot of issues there around fundamental rights as well as competition and consumer issues.
Yeah, but so, very close to home, when we do a merger procedure, we would look into what role will data play here. Maybe it's nothing, because the data the two businesses merge is something that you can easily copy, or you can buy it, or you can create it yourself the next day. but maybe they merge sets of data that will work as a unique source for innovation and a barrier to entry for other businesses in this market. And that could give us a concern. Where the first situation will give us no concern, then the last situation may give us concern. And this is why we analyze in depth what role will data play as a resource, as an asset for businesses when they merge. And then, of course, we keep an eye open as to if privacy can become a competition issue. I think we still have some way to go because the new, stronger rules and rights that we have are still new in the making. But what one cannot exclude is that it will also be an area of competition because you can expect services that will compete on the quality of the protection that they can give you as a citizen or as another business.
Well, I mean, the logical extension of that would be that companies that have amassed too much data and are in positions of ridiculous dominance, which we can admit is sort of the case, do you go down the road of saying they need to be broken up or broken into segments?
Well, that, of course, is an interesting question, to what degree size matter in that respect. I think it's an important discussion, but maybe it's even more important to discuss how to get access to data. Because now we know that we all own our data, but the thing is that we give very often a royalty-free license for the big companies to use our data almost to whatever. So for smaller businesses to get access to huge amounts of data, to be able to innovate, to be able to provide services, how can we enable us to give this access since we now own the data? And that, I think, is sort of the next phase as to figure out how big data can be available also for small and medium-sized businesses who are just in the process of getting there.
And of course, there's a distinction between personal data and non-personal data,
Yes,
to conflate the two. The other question that comes up repeatedly is the speed with which competition cases move, and the Commission in particular. I mean, we're talking about digitization and the speed of innovation and a world that's moving incredibly fast. How can even competition keep pace? Competition enforcement.
Of course, first of all, we have to look dangerous, because the best thing is, of course, if the rules are not broken, which is a good reason to give out fines that have a sufficient level to have some deterrence. There is one thing, though, that is inherent in the work we do, and if I may give a parallel, if your house is broken into, it may take 5 minutes for someone to get in, find your valuables, out. But it will take the police weeks and the court system months to find the guilty person, to judge the guilty person. Because we live in the union based on the rule of law, and you have the right to defend yourself, and cases should be fully supported by evidence. And that asymmetry in time is, of course, also our asymmetry. And since we will never compromise on due process and the right to defend yourself, and that our cases should stand up in court, of course, there's a limit to how fast we can be. That being said, of course, we should digitalize as well. And we do that. Should we have an algorithm so that we can police the markets to see what the other algorithms are doing out there? But also, should we have new rules? And I have asked 3 extremely insightful people, one with an expertise in economics, one in competition law, and one in tech, to come together and to give advice, and they will give their report by March next year, to look into the future, how to make sure that we make the best in the marketplace in this digital revolution. And we will also have an open conference by January next year for everyone to come and to offer their perspectives, so that we make sure that we also get the right regulatory tools to be able to stay relevant for all the businesses who want to compete by the book, but to need an open market to be able to do that.
Okay, now I'm going to come to some questions from the floor in just a moment, but I have another question that I got off Twitter, and if you do want to tweet at us during this, you can use the hashtag TatraSummit18. So, please share beyond this room and this lovely setting what we're talking about. One of the questions was, what attracts AI talent to Europe? It's a little bit off your beat, but have you any ideas?
Well, I think to a very large degree, quality of life. Of course, not everyone can live here where the air is crisp and sweet, but in many other places, you have also very high quality of life. You may have another work-life balance. You have access to very good infrastructure. Both partners can have a job. You have very good educational system for children. I think one has to realize that we have so much to offer, both when it comes to quality of life, also when it comes to the quality of doing business. Because Europe sort of can cover the full palette of what you need. Reasonable taxes, high-skilled people, research and innovation, good governments, very good infrastructure. All of that is working very well for us.
Well, you mentioned taxes. We'll probably come on to that in just a moment. But first, let me see. Anyone in the room got questions that they would like to ask? No one? In this audience? Okay, well, let us come back then. You mentioned also very fresh air, so I feel like I should raise Dieselgate as an issue as well. I want to ask whether, we see these scandals and these breaches of competition and abuses of dominance. Does this create a sort of, I sort of asked this at the beginning, but do you believe it actually creates distrust amongst consumers?
Yes, I'm afraid so. Because for more and more consumers, it makes a difference that you are actually not polluting the environment for your co-citizens. I think that one thing is to say, well, this is the product, this is the upside, this is the downside, this is what it is. It's another thing to say, this is what it is, and then it turns out to be something else. And I have colleagues with Jyrki Katainen heading this, who's deep into investigating the diesel scandal. We just opened the investigation of another type of car cartel, which is very specifically scoped, because we, of course, want businesses to work together in an open fashion to innovate where it becomes too difficult to do it one-on-one. For instance, on security, we're just talking about the Battery Alliance. That makes extremely good sense. But what we suspect here is that a number of car companies have agreed not to use the most innovative technologies to clean emissions. To say, well, no, we will not use the best. We agree among us that we will not use the best technology to clean exhaustion from petrol cars and diesel cars. Of course, to some degree, I hope not to be proven right, because this is, of course, very sad. Because also here, of course, we need competition in innovation. Who can give you the best car also when it comes to using the best technology, in order also to drive the others forward, literally in this case.
So, that's just the cases. You're sort of highlighting more cases again there that we're going to have to keep an eye on. So let me ask you, looking to the future, do you see changes needed perhaps in the area of policy law or regulation or tax regulation, just, for the next commission coming forward?
Oh, but in that case, we have prepared very well. Because even though competition closely with regulation, as how should the marketplace work? Like in the relationship between business and platforms, because it comes back over and over again that businesses say, we have no transparency. We don't know what is happening, we don't know why it's happening, and we're perfect in that respect, but we're trying to update sort of the very basic concept of corporate taxation, because everything digitalizes. Data obviously also is a thing in transportation, in agriculture, in health. So we better get our head together also to figure out how should taxation work in a much more digital world.
Okay, have we any questions? Yes, sir.
Fabian Zulik from the European Policy Center. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for those remarks. I want globalization, global value chains, which is affecting companies in Europe quite profoundly. And we can arguably enforce competition laws, fair competition, the kind of rules which we think are important within Europe. But for our companies, it's also a question in how far they face fair competition elsewhere. So what can we do to make sure that the global environment also follows those rules?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yeah.
Because that's a very good question, which is why it is part of our social or our global strategy to fight harmful subsidies in a global manner. I have, for instance, a memorandum of understanding with my Chinese counterparts to, as a first step, create transparency when it comes to subsidies. And there's no reason to be sort of too proud of ourselves. When we stopped counting a couple of years ago, I think in Europe we had handed out, or at least made available, 691 billion euros for our financial system in order to keep that stable. And it's just to say that when you're open about what you do yourself, then you can, to a greater degree, ask openness of other people. In the trade policy, it's an issue as well. In the Japanese EU trade agreement just finalized, it's an agreement for them to do away with a number of their most harmful subsidies, the ones that we would never ever have here with the present set of rules. I think it's very important what is done in the reign of G7 and G20, who has also put this on the agenda to create transparency. In the reform of the WTO, this is also an issue, because we have reporting systems in the WTO set of rules, but they are obviously not being used to full extent. So it has to be a global endeavor to have the harmful subsidies come down. And then, of course, I think, to some degree, to be slightly more hard-nosed than we used to be. By having access to do screening of foreign direct investment, to ask for reciprocity, which I thought should be a given. Because trade is about having relationships, so is competition. And I think in this way we can have a very balanced approach and still within sort of our global multilateral set of rules and frameworks.
But does it frustrate you that competition enforcement gets dragged into other issues or co-opted?
Oh no, it's always great when people talk about what you do. No, I think the important thing is for the idea of competition to travel as far as possible. But I think it is for us to fend for ourselves, to say, as we, for instance, did, we have three, some of them quite controversial mergers in the agrichemical sector, to say, people say, well, you have to consider environmental effects when seeds and pesticides gets combined in one company. And what we had to say, well, we will look after the farmer to make sure that he can turn to someone else, or she can turn to someone else for a competing seed, for competing pesticides. But environmental laws, they were in place before the merger, during the merger, after the merger. And we shouldn't just put it all into one big ball, but make sure that we have the distinctions. Also because sometimes you want much more environmental regulation than what you would ever sort of put into the area of competition. Same goes for labor laws. Same goes for the control of things that can give us cancer. All kinds of regulation, and I think it is very important that we are strict to keep that in place and not putting that into sort of the bowl of competition.
I mean, isn't that difficult with the whole tech sector as well, where we can't quite easily say we know what's going on, and we can't take, if you like, an almost precautionary principle approach?
That I didn't quite understand.
Well, I mean, if we have, for example, algorithms developing and machine learning, and there aren't enough experts. For example, perhaps, I mean, you have experts in the Commission, but they don't really understand the nuts and bolts to say this could be damaging. Whereas in environmental law, we will say this could be damaging, so we will take a, you know, a precautionary approach to it.
Oh, well, that's a very important discussion. We have a tool of interim measures that is very difficult to use, but we've sort of opened the drawer and put the tool on our desk to be able to use it if we find a good case actually to use it for. The problem that we have is that in the Commission we have a very, very high legal bar to pass. That makes it very difficult, which is kind of the dilemma here, to use it on new things that we discover. But since it is exactly when new things are happening, you would want to be able to take interim measures. Then, of course, we are ready to use it if we find a case where it would be useful to do that, exactly because of what you say.
Well, we keep our eyes open for that. Any other questions, please? Anyone?
It's the view. They're distracted,
Yes.
completely distracted by the view.
Thank you. Nadia Kowalczyka from the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Brussels. I have a question about this taxation. You mentioned digital companies versus traditional companies. Digital companies 9% tax, traditional 23%, so we have to make it more fair. My question is your understanding of more fair making the taxes even lower? Or is it higher, especially when you would have to be accountable as a politician in the national governments, where people don't have even access or fair access to healthcare, pensions are extremely low, people live very below the decent standards in most of the European countries. So what is actually fair in terms of taxation of the big digital or small digital companies or others? Thank you.
Well, if taxes as such should be higher or lower, that is actually for national governments to decide. The point that, or the discussion where we have tabled a proposal is to say, sort of old school understanding of corporate taxation cannot understand how value is created in a digital company or how you have a taxable presence. If you take a Google search, this is not a product you take from the shelf, it's something where you create value when you do the Google search. So you're part of the value creation here. So it's actually created where you are. Of course, their algorithm and their IP and so, that plays a huge role, but the value cannot be created without you doing the Google search. So we have to sort of rethink how value is created in order to see value creation and therefore also tax value creation. And the second element is to see, well, what does it mean to have a taxable presence? Because some digital companies, they never set foot in your country. Their servers, they are in wonderful cold northern Norway to save energy. But actually, they have a very good business. But they're not here. How to understand that? How to make sure that we can see when you do a good business and you create value in the country, that you also have a taxable presence. And without these concepts, at first, and then, of course, for governments, responsible to their national voters to decide, will we tax more or will we tax less? Because there can be needs in the member states that their politicians would want to address.
Okay, it's your last chance, ladies and gentlemen. Have we any more questions in the room before I go to Twitter for the most burning question of the day? Nope. So the question people on Twitter were asking is, what's your favorite cocktail?
Oh, I'm kind of a traditional woman in that. That would be a gin and tonic.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Would be my pleasure.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we got to the end of that without anyone using the phrase, data is the new oil. So well done, everyone. Now, I would like to invite to join me, please, Daniel Kretinsky, who is the Chairman of the Board of Directors of EP Holding. Thank you, Daniel.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So a very straightforward first question. You were listening very attentively. What struck you most about the Commissioner's remarks?
They were indeed, many of them, very inspiring. And I wouldn't say that anything struck me on its own, but what I would add and probably follow up on what she rightfully indicated is that I think really we are in a situation where, especially for digital economy, we cannot rely only on antitrust. We all need to be mindful of the fact, and it's quite paradoxical because actually I'm representing the business sphere, but we have to be mindful that with the digital economy, we have entered into a zone where the traditional monopolies are effectively toys for kids compared to the monopolies that are rising up today. Maybe I can quote a few figures. I'm sure most of you will know them. But anyway, the share of 9 largest digital companies on the digital economy, on the digital revenues, is 90%. 4 out of the 9 are in China, or located in China. 5 are taking care of rest of the world. Combined EBITDA, so the gross earnings produced by Apple, Google, and Facebook, are $160 billion annually, which is probably 10 times Slovak state budget annually. And it's growing by 20% for Google and 50% for Facebook. We have globally 4.5 to 4.7 billion users of mobile devices, out of which 90% is served either by the Android produced by Google, which is I think 77%, and remaining 13% by Apple. Share of Google and Facebook on the growth of digital advertisement is well above 90%. Not only that, we have the new problem of big data. And the problem of big data is that effectively big majority of the big data in an organized way is in the position of these big tech companies. These big tech companies are also leaders in the artificial intelligence. The best existing algorithm is the AlphaZero created by DeepMind, which has been acquired by Google. More, I would also add that an important feature of these companies, and I can 100% understand it, and I have to say that I fully appreciate their great contributions to our lives, to the economic growth. In a way, they've saved us. Otherwise, I think we would have faced serious issues, but they've enabled a new wave of innovation. And I'm actually very much admiring what they were able to create in so short period of time. But we also need to appreciate that these really global monopolies of unprecedented scale, never ever in the history any company was even close to have the power of the big tech, and especially Google, who is paradoxically bringing also the highest value to the society. So we have to say that these companies have still the spirit of growth and taking over. So contrary to the much, much smaller monopolies in the physical world or real economy, they keep growing. If they see a potential competitor, a new force that could change, that could move the needle and change the balance, they would immediately acquire it. Facebook owns Instagram, Google owns YouTube, Google acquired DeepMind, which could have moved the needle in a different way. So we are in a situation that existing antitrust rules, even with all the efforts of the commissioner, cannot bring answers to these questions. I think we seriously need, and this is in the interest of the big tech, we need a completely new regulation that would set up rules on which we can rely, rules that would mitigate the biggest risks before the big tech eats us and themselves. But at the same time, rules which then would be, if possible, stable, so that they can rely on it and they can understand what is their space, where they can grow, and which rules they need to follow, because they are bringing the service and they deserve to be the biggest companies in the world, which they are today, and for sure they are going to exponentially grow in any case. Maybe to that, allow me 3 or 4 small examples and then I'll stop talking. Imagine the world of energy, which is my original world. Everybody who knows the third energy directive of the European Commission knows how strict rules we need to follow. There are strict rules of unbundling. There are strict rules saying how and in how much independent way you can operate power or gas transmission system, distribution system, storage system, supply, production, or very, very strict rules. If you operate an infrastructure, you need to always operate it in a transparent way. You need to allow free access to all players in an equal way. Internet is a huge communication infrastructure. It's an information infrastructure, the most global one. Never we had any global infrastructure of any similar kind. For that infrastructure, we have absolutely no rules. Effectively, Google, Facebook, and all the other companies, without these rules, I have to say logically, what they are doing, they are effectively hard selling their own products. When talking about transparency, now with the new algorithm of Google, sometimes if you want to find the first unpaid result of the search, you need to scroll on your mobile, etc., etc. But I wouldn't say that this is their problem. This is really the problem of completely missing rules, because in that situation, the structure just takes the place. So that's one example. The other example, which is for me absolutely striking, is the example of regulation in the media. If you are a small publisher, probably producing a magazine that would have 10,000 readers, you have tons of obligations in terms of protection of third parties' rights. And you are responsible for all the content in your little magazine. If you are a Facebook and you are operating, or you are effectively operating because they are operator of the structure, you are operating a public web page that has 6 million users, you have no obligation, even not to know, you even are not obliged to know who is producing the page. It's like if we had a huge TV channel that would broadcast all over the globe and broadcast to the mass of population any content, even the most naughty one, with the arguments that they didn't produce it. Unthinkable in the real world, but fully realistic in the digital world. For taxes, dear Commissioner, I would share with you the reality of this region. In this region, and sorry, I will use the Czech example because it was for me faster to find it. In the Czech Republic, Google generates probably, because it's not published, probably 200 million euros of sales. The taxes are 0.1% of the sales, 200,000 euros. The taxes of Facebook are, to make it simple, zero.
Okay, before we go on, I've a voice in my ear, and it's not just in my head. You've covered a lot of ground there in one big mouthful, and I want to try and pick apart some bits of it.
Sorry for that.
So, I mean, one of the things there you said, I mean, we're supposed to be talking about entrepreneurship in this section, and you talked about Google gobbling up, or not just, I mean, I'm Google because it's in my eye line, but you know, these big companies. But I mean, you can put laws in place, but if there is a culture where startups are really only trying to be, and their measure of success is to be bought by these big companies, isn't there some sort of cultural change that needs to happen there?
I think really we cannot rely on culture, and the simple reason is that the digital world is evolving super fast. The companies need to think super fast and need to act super fast. We really need to define the playground, tell them, and I repeat again, if I was a shareholder of Google, I would really support that idea, because otherwise there is no other way than we will, at the end of the day, either really have a giant problem or witness new Rockefeller case, or rather an antitrust case that would put the famous Rockefeller case somewhere completely in the corner, because it cannot continue. So what I think really we need to think about the right rules. What is the degree of vertical integration? To what extent, for instance, big data should be public, and there should be a free access to it in a structured way. You know, to what, and now we can think of many others. For instance, the topic that I've quoted for me is an easy one. Why somebody who is effectively producing a media business in the digital world should not have the same obligation like somebody in the real world? You know, and there are many, many questions. Of course, I don't know the answers. But what I greatly believe in is that really there has to be a new regulation. But what is crucially important, the regulation must not be a fight against the big tech. This would be completely wrong. It has to be a debate about what are the good rules and the rules which are sustainable. So the trade-off for the big tech is to tell them, unfortunately, this is not how it can go, because it's far too much, but these are rules we will stand behind, and if you are within the rules, then you can grow and you can do your business. Maybe they will have to give up some businesses. Maybe artificial intelligence has to be separated from the company that is owning the big data. Or maybe it has to be run in an independent way. Maybe if you have search, you need to give up other parts of your business model. All that has to be debated. But ultimately, there is no doubt that the growth of these companies is going to be exponential, and this will be the they are already today far largest companies in the world, and they are going to be much, much bigger in any case. But I think the trade-off is for sustainability. And for your question, the money in the digital world is there. By the way, I have a remark here. The three companies, Apple, Google, and Facebook, are holding on the accounts $370 billion US, 20 to 25 times Slovak state budget. So I think for the guys who are willing to, to develop their own products and then be bought by them, there is enough, and there will be much, much, much more. So that motivation is going to be preserved regardless, and any rules are going to be implemented.
Well, I mean, taking for your example there of the media company, we did just see a vote in the European Parliament last week on the AVMS, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, that is pushing for that. So, you need to get out and lobby.
That's an important initiative, yeah.
But let me unpick a bit this idea of big data, because big data is not just simply one thing. Big data is made up of personal and non-personal data, and they're treated in hugely different ways. And you've got, within the realm of big data, you've also got open data. And, there were plenty. Last week I hosted the EU Datathon, which was, encouraging young people to develop apps using the EU Open Data Portal. I mean, but there's only so much in terms, that's like EU institutions backed project. But if we do then think that the data is a commodity, how would you persuade a company to give away their commodity? Who would do that?
It has actually happened many times in the real world. And again, I feel now a bit strange because, again, I'm not a fighter against the big tech. By the way, my main business is energy, but we have invested also in e-commerce, and I'm a great believer in that business and in the value of the business. But at the same time, there were situations when one company owned the infrastructure, it owned all the clients' data, it served the whole business. In the energy business, in the energy world, that has been the business model 20 years ago, fully implemented. Now we have a completely new business model where the infrastructure is separated from the client's business. So something which has been unthinkable in the real world can be implemented. Of course, it's much more complex. But I'm just simply saying we really need to think about the rules and start to also signal where it will go, because otherwise it's going to be a huge crash. And it's, I would say, 5 minutes after 12 for me.
Have we questions? Or oh wow, very fast. Okay, I don't know who was quicker.
Good afternoon, I'm Ondřej Houska, journalist from Hospodářské noviny, Czech newspaper. Mr. Křetinsky, you have also spoken about the media, and you own media in the Czech Republic and now also in France. Why are you now investing, let's say, quite massively in the media? What's your business plan there, or why are you going from the energy sector now to media? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Straightforward question, and I'll answer to that in the same way. Of course, it has more angles, but the main one is that I am a true believer in the fact that traditional media and traditional journalism are effectively an incredibly important pillar of European democracy. We have lived, and our democracies have worked in a sustainable way, based on the principle, by the way, of quality interpretation of information. The European citizens were for decades or centuries given information and immediate interpretation of the information. The interpretation of the information was the work of the qualified journalist. So the person from the street, the normal citizen, has received information, this is what has happened at the level of state budget, at the level of the international affairs, and then immediately you received the interpretation. it is good or bad for this and this reason. And the interpretation played enormous role in the education process of the voters for the elections. And we had a quality vote in the Western European democracies for many decades, high quality vote. What we have now with the domain of digitalization, unfortunately, is a change of behavior of us, the citizens. And what we are doing on the internet is that we are just scanning what is happening there. We are reading only the titles, if we read any web page at all. And the reason is that we are really bringing up a generation of complete political ignorance. Our own education goes down and the new generation is completely ignorant. So what I think that it is really necessary to support this. And because of all the trends, the media houses are so strong, so weak, and so much on the knees that unfortunately they need to be sponsored. And this is what we are doing.
And unfortunately, we have to leave it there
Sorry.
because we have speakers for our next panel
Sorry.
waiting.
Sorry.
But it's such a huge issue. Thank you very much. I'm sure we will talk
Sorry.
much more about that in the coming days. Thank you again very much, and thank you, Commissioner. And I would now like to call up the moderator who will introduce our next panel, and that is Maithreyi Sitharaman, who is the CEO of Facultas Media Limited, coming from London. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Well, it's lovely to be here, and I have to say I wasn't expecting that view, and it's too bad that my back's going to be turned on it. I think we all know why we're here. I'd like to bring up the panel that we've all been waiting for as quickly as possible, but I know if we've opened a newspaper in the last couple of years, or months especially, or our mobile phones, the bad news just keeps flowing, and the good news is hard to find. So to figure out what we're going to do in terms of acting and reacting, I'd like to invite our finance ministers up on stage. But first, could I get Andreas Streichel? He is the CEO of Erste Group Bank, up on stage. Followed by His Excellency Peter Casimir, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the Slovak Republic. His Excellency Olaf Scholz, Vice-Chancellor and Federal Minister of Finance of the Federal Republic of Germany. And last but definitely not the least, His Excellency Bruno Le Maire. He is Minister of Economy and Finance of the French Republic. Gentlemen, I think the easiest way to start once our waters are refreshed and changed would be to consider the news that has been flowing continuously, especially since 2016, if we discount all the news before that when it came to the financial crisis. We've got issues with transatlantic relationships. We've got a potential brewing trade war. We've got problems at home with populism, with fragmentation. We've got autocratic governments that are starting to raise their head, corruption issues that are starting to come to the forefront. It almost feels like the good news is drowned in the bad. So, and there is good news. I mean, unemployment levels are pretty darn good. Businesses are starting to invest, and we're seeing the investment plan starting to show some amount of success. So what I'd like for us to do on the stage to lay out the groundwork is to say, what are the 3 top concerns for you individually when it comes to what can impact the European economy? And Minister Le Maire, if I can start with you, it would be good to kind of set the stage for what concerns individual countries in Europe and, of course, the businesses.
Thank you. Good news is that the weather is beautiful in Tatras. Thank you, Peter. As far as the concerns are concerned, I will be very brief. I think that the first concern for the French economy and for the European economy as a whole and for the world economy is the risk of a trade war. I really think that the risk of a trade war might jeopardize growth all over Europe and all over the world, and especially a trade war between the United States and China. And I think that the role of the European countries should be to try to alleviate those difficulties and to try to find solutions to the risk of that trade war. The second concern is the lack of convergence among EU countries. We need more convergence, especially within the Eurozone. More convergence as far as competitiveness of the private companies is concerned, but also more convergence in the way we are dealing with our public expenses and public debt. We are all on the same boat. And that's why France is doing its best to try to reduce the level of public expenses and to meet the European commitments, because we are all on the same boat, and if there is any difficulty in one single country, one member of the Eurozone, it might have an effect on all the other members. And the third concern is the risk of having a new financial crisis without being able to build the necessary tools to face that financial crisis. We should never forget that we are still living the consequences of the financial crisis of 2008, and that our citizen is waiting for us to take the dramatic decisions and the necessary decisions to face any kind of new financial crisis. We have built the Eurozone to be strong and to be together and to be able to face such a new financial crisis.
Vice Chancellor.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's a long list I would be able to tell you, but I will stick to three. So the first is also the question of trade in the globalized economy. I think this is how we should put it. And what is our answers to that? We learn in these days what a luck the European Union is for all of us, because otherwise we would be in much bigger problems. And not a single country is now facing discussions with the United States about trade. It's all the European Union. And it was really amazing to see when we went there as ministers, discussed with our colleagues from the American administrations that they learn from day to day that there really is something called the European Union and that they have to tackle with them. And so I think it's the difficulty we have to face, but it's also a promise in the experience we have today. The second is, I will really subscribe what Bruno said, that we have to fulfill all the questions which are still on the agenda of doing the task after the last financial crisis. We did a lot, but we have not succeeded with the necessary steps, and we should, so that we are better prepared as we were 2008 and 2009. And so I think this is what we have to do, and I think there must be progress even up to the end of that year to be prepared. No one of us knows whether the next big financial crisis might happen in 1 year or in 20. But as we are not the ones deciding about the crisis when they come, it is necessary to be prepared and to be at all the times. The third is, I could mention some economic questions, but we will have time to debate them. So I will say the question that will speak about the question which bothers me most today. We are losing trust and confidence. The people are not very happy in the most rich and most industrialized countries. This is happening in Europe, this is happening in North America, this is happening in Japan, and this is happening in the Australian archipelago. So the traditional industrialized economies are the ones who are still the richest of the world and who will be for a long time. But they are not that confident that there is a good future for them and their children and their grandchildren. And this produces a lot of political problems and the rise of wrong answers to the problems we face. And while this is happening, we see that all over in the world, many people are looking quite confident to their future. There is 1 billion people raising to the middle class in Asia and other places, and we have the people who are unemployed, unskilled, uneducated, have no access to water, and is reducing dramatically. But this is the problem we face, and to be very honest, I think the answer we have to give at the place we live is the European Union, because this is the only way to tackle the problems and possibly to develop a future where people are more confident about us they are today.
You're in an interesting position, Deputy Prime Minister, geographically and in terms of just the way you have to juxtapose these viewpoints? What are your top 3 concerns?
Sometimes it seems to me sometimes that we are the generation of people after the 2008, the generation of people which is waiting for the another crisis. And it's not. I think it's not good because we did a lot in many areas. And okay, I'm coming from the country. Slovakia is a country with a very successful story. We are talking about the economic growth with figures about 4% this year, next year 4.5%. We are talking about the Visegrad 4 group, but we know that we are not an island. There's a division of labor between there's a big influence of German economy, and wave of populism, egoism, and protectionism. And these global trends are really threats for us. And in my view, this is the momentum to deliver. And once Olaf mentioned the lack of trust, I think this is the biggest problem. Because I'm talking about the stability of political systems in our countries, and it's dramatically changed, over the last 10 years, So I'm a little bit frustrated looking at the process of, for example, the deepening of EMU. This is one very important issue. We are really committed to the further integration. We are pleased with Franco-German paper, Messenberg paper, presented just several weeks ago. But what we see that, we policymakers in Europe, we always know what should be done, So media knows, businesses knows, but there's still we are not doing that, and so we are behind the curve because we are exporting, and this is my personal view, we used to export our domestic problems on the European level. Mm-hmm. And to be very short term, looking forward, so this shortened procedure, or shortened approach, it's very dangerous to us. And the further integration or this is our destiny. This is my personal view. But and at the European level, this is always European. This is the second. This is not the first. That's a pity, I think.
Mm-hmm. Andreas, I think it brings in a facet that I'd love to hear from a banking perspective. When we talk about a deepening EMU, we're talking about the banking union, still not complete. At some point, what worries you and keeps you up at night when you're running a business the way you are?
Well, as you know, I don't consider myself a banker. I consider myself an entrepreneur who happens to run a financial company. And since I'm the only member of the working class on this podium, maybe let me take a different view.
But you know that the working class you represent is paid quite well.
That's not that. I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's bad.
Always reporting dividends paid to the working class.
Right, before this becomes a bonus discussion, let's get your top 3 concerns.
Yeah. Maybe I can really tell you the one thing that really worries me, because I'm an incredibly engaged European. I love Europe, and I actually think it's the best place to live in the world. And one of my fears is that in the future, if Europe continues like that, we will still be probably the loveliest place in the world to live in, but we will only get tourists. And that could be okay for parts of Europe, but all in all, I think we shouldn't go that way. And if I look back at what we did with our company, and I tell you why I mentioned that, is that I only started to really understand what I'm here for when I started to understand the why. Why does my company actually exist? And it took us a long time. We all know what we do and how we do it, but actually we found out long before the crisis, hopefully, thanks God, that we're here to create prosperity for the people in the region in which we work. That's our only purpose and nothing else. And if I compare now, and if you look at the trade war, the three main economic areas in the world, I know pretty much what the Chinese want. And they run China a bit like a company, and they regard the 1.2 billion Chinese as their employees, who slowly start to benefit from the management of the country. And I think for the moment, also in the United States, people know what the government really wants, whether you like it or not, but they're here for basically making sure that America beats everybody else economically in the world, and everybody else is a competitor. So they have a clear why. You might not like that why, but they have it. And my biggest fear is actually, can we get Europe, actually, the politicians in Europe, in Brussels and in the countries, to commonly agree on what do we want to make out of Europe? And is there a chance that at some point in time during the next 5-10 years, you will have a Europe of 27 where everybody says the same thing? This is where we want to have Europe in the future. This is what Europe actually stands for. Do we stand for a liberal, free economy with a lot more equality than in other countries? So the rich people are willing to give up more in order to help, or not? Do we want to have open borders or not? And I'm getting very worried on what I see during the last years, because what I experience for the moment is exactly the opposite of what I hoped for Europe would be. As you know, I was extremely, the most joyful moment for me as a Central European was 1989. And even more so when finally Slovak Porsches and Hungarian BMWs and Polish Mercedes passed me by on the Austrian motorway, and I had no borders. And now I have a border. Basically, I have to wait on the border to Germany because it's being checked. It's a development that goes in the wrong direction. So I don't know where Europe actually stands for the moment, and I don't know whether our politicians will be able to agree on what Europe should be for the people in the world.
I think that's a question for the two of you, because I think at some point there have been a lot of headlines in the last couple of days. No thanks to the country I currently reside in, and I'm surprised that neither of you brought that up as a rather large concern. We know your viewpoints on it; those were top headlines as well. But at some point, you need to, I think, that concern of where is Europe headed? We don't have the banking union, as I mentioned. You've talked about wanting to look at it completed in the next couple of months. But we have deposit insurance issues. We don't have any sort of agreement and a solid answer to the tax on tech companies. There are lots of little gaps, as Andreas was pointing out, where Europe doesn't talk together.
If I may answer to the question. First of all, these are technical questions, but the key question raised by the only worker on the stage is a political one. And I think that we should raise the stake, and that's the difficulty that we are all facing, and we should all try to understand why populist parties, extremist parties, are gaining voters all over Europe, in Germany, in France, in Italy, all over Europe. We have to face that key political challenge. To me, because of the lack of political willingness, the lack of decisions, and the lack of vision. For the Eurozone, for instance, we have all the tools on the table. We just have to decide. For the digital taxation, we have been discussing for more than 12 months. We have a formal proposal from the EU Commission. We just have to decide. What are we waiting for? And then we have a lack of vision. I think that the basic of Europe is liberal democracy. And we should stick to that, because liberal democracy now are at stake. Then we have the political purposes that might gather all the European people. First, the fight against inequalities. That's a point raised by Olaf, and I really think that this is a critical issue. We don't want an economy in which the rich people are growing richer and richer, and the poorest people do not have any possibility to become rich. We need to fight against inequalities for the sake of preserving our cultural and political model, and also for the sake of economic efficiency. That's the first political purpose that we should put on the table to gather the European people. The second one is the fight against climate change. We are the only continent which has the willingness to really fight clearly and in an efficient way against climate change. The US have got rid of that. China is not able and is not in a situation to go this way. So we have to really reaffirm that we are all willing to give new tools and new instruments to fight against climate change. And the last critical point for Europe, even if it is not an economic point, is the necessity to protect our borders. Because we have to explain to our people that we are a continent which is not open to all the rest of the world. We are a political continent, and there is no political construction in the world history without borders. And when there is a lack of borders, it is in the end of the European construction and the end of any political construction. A last point, innovation. Innovation should be our driver, because I fully share your point of view and your assessment. I don't want Europe to become a huge Disneyland. And if we don't want Europe to become a huge Disneyland, we have to invest in innovation, in new technologies, in disruptive technologies. We have been able to build Airbus. We have been able to build Ariane and Arianespace. What are now the new technological borders? We need to gather our funding to face the challenges of artificial intelligence, space, new technologies, because if we want to keep that technological sovereignties, we need to invest far more.
Do you agree, Vice-Chancellor? I mean, none of those points are arguable. It's the methodology of getting there.
I think this is important points, and I do agree very much. But I would like to answer to the question from a different perspective.
Yes, please.
I think we have to understand how the process of European integration worked so far. So there was in the beginning the attempt to do it with political ideas, for instance, forming a military union of Europe. This stopped then because there was no agreement, and then we started with building the best single market of the world. And we succeeded more or less. There's still something to do, especially if we look at the financial and the banking sector, and there's a lot of problems because it's quite difficult to build competitive big companies. So I think our idea about a competitive market is more looking within the market of Europe or the single countries, but not looking at global competitors, so that we have to form companies of a size which could be successful in the global market. This is in many questions something to be discussed. But in the end, this is not the main question. The main question is that we are now at a stage where we have to discuss about political questions, and they are not, could not be answered by regulation, by rules, and court cases. So I'm coming from a federal country with a long history of federal tradition, and I think you remember the history of the Holy Roman Empire of German nation or something like that. It was all about rules, courts, and different powers fighting against each other. There was not a common strategy. And the city of Hamburg, I was the mayor of that city-state, had cases at the court for 150 years or so. And this should not be the model for the European Union. We should be a bit more integrated and a bit more able to define common political strategies. And so I think it's about foreign policy. I very much support the foreign minister of Germany saying that we should have not an unanimous vote in the Council of the Foreign Ministers. There should be a majority vote for having a common strategy. We should cooperate in building our defense infrastructure, which is meaning discussing about where we buy our military instruments. And if you compare the United States to Europe, they have 30 different ways of military instruments, weapons. We have, I think, approximately 180. It's absolutely clear that no one can pay for it, that it will not work, that there is a big pressure on exporting these things to the rest of the world without looking to political questions because the market is too small. So I think now we are at the stage where we should do that to form a common approach of buying the things we need for our European defense, for instance. We need a strategy on the European borders, which is not the border between Germany and Austria, which you mentioned. It is the border around of all of us, which my friend Bruno mentioned. And then we have, which is the next question, a common responsibility for those entering our European continent. And I think this is the lesson Austria learned, Germany learned, the Netherlands learned, Sweden learned mostly. Because if you think you are right in the center and you have not a border to the outside areas, and what happens at the borders is not your problem, it is a mistake. And so I think all the debates we had about refugees in 2015, 16, 17 started when we refused to be very helpful when the first refugees came via the Strait of Gibraltar from the North Africa to Spain and Portugal and did not help them. So now is the time to show that we learned our lesson, that there is a common responsibility. However, we will find a solution, but we have to understand that thinking that this is not bothering any one of us is a mistake. And this is the same with all the questions of arbitrage with social welfare instruments, which should not happen, arbitrage with regulation, arbitrage with the way how we look at climate questions in industry or things like that. So this is what we have to do. And to give, and the end is, when we understand that there is possibly a world where we are still linked to the United States because of common grounds we have, looking at democracy, the rule of law, and things like that. But it might happen that the political strategy in the United States is more to look at the own interests, not looking who is the other friends on the democratic side. It is necessary that we build our Europe, that it is sovereign enough to be not pushed around. And this is the task the politicians now responsible have. If we are not able to face the challenges of a world of 10 billion inhabitants, we will be in a very difficult position. But if we are able to, we must be not desperate about the future of Europe. We have a chance to be very successful.
Optimism's pretty much all around on the stage, so I do want to give you a heads up that I would like to come to you for questions. We have a room full of experts, so please raise your hands when you're ready and give us a name. Refrain from any comments, a very short question to our panelists, and then we'll pick up the conversation from there.
Sure. Hi, I'm Marin Gazik from IPM. One of the biggest advantages in the global economy, and this talk is about the economic future of Europe, is technology. And Monsieur Le Maire, you mentioned already technological sovereignty.
Shorter question.
What I'm curious to know from you is how do you think Europe should be going about preserving technological sovereignty, and what would be the next steps for that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Andreas?
I like that question because Mr. Le Maire said something which I fully agree with him. It's a shame that it takes us 12 months to decide on digital tax in Europe because the Dutch don't want it. But I don't think it's the biggest problem. And I think I would like our politicians actually to think about why don't we have any large digital companies before we think about taxation of digital companies. Our problem is that we don't have any major companies. Why do the Americans have Amazon, Facebook, Google, and so on? And why do the Chinese have Alibaba, Tencent, and so on? And why is the biggest digital company in Europe SAP? This is the real issue that we have. Why don't we have it? Why do we not have the young entrepreneurs like the Americans have, like the Chinese have, that build companies like that? And part of the reason why we don't have it is that we are not even able to build a banking union, and we are just light years away of building a capital market union. And that's going to take another 50 years. What will happen until then? But we're thinking already about taxing a capital market union before we even have it. And this is the issue that we presently have in Europe. We should be, and you mentioned the fact that there could be another financial crisis. Everybody is talking about American banks having done a better job than European banks. I can promise you, the French, the English, the German, and the Austrian, and the Slovak bankers are by no means dumber than the Americans. Our problem is that we finance 75% of the economy of Europe. Therefore, we are a big problem if something goes wrong. And the American banks finance 25% of the American economy. So if they do something wrong, it's a small problem, a smaller problem for America. So we have to think about on how can we build together a market where we can get young entrepreneurs to invest, where we get the money from them so that we can have our European Amazon, our European Facebook, and we don't have to buy it from the Americans. And please, let's talk about that. That would be wonderful. If we start talking about that, I'd be really happy.
Let's talk about it.
No,
Give Big Andrea's wish come true.
Now we see how hard-working working class in banks is there. Okay, but I fully agree with this. The portion 75% of credits granted by European banks, and there's a lag of this capital market union, but we are very far from the new technologies like blockchain or cryptocurrencies assets. Just looking at this as a inevitable future which is coming, So once I've been in Asian Forum this January, so just to understand the substance of discussion, then definitely you understand that we are lacking in that area. And I would like to must fully agree with Bruno's manifesto, because Bruno presented manifesto today here, and I just would like to add maybe that let's put several principles. Let's put the European interest on the top of everything, because now there's a real threat, European threat about our future, and we have to find out the protects, the respects, because we have to find in every piece of European mosaic something which is protecting and respecting national interests. Let's cooperate closer and more effective. And this is about the division about the West and East, which is here. We used to divide during the debt crisis about the North and South, but it's this division between East and West on migration issues, for example, just very, very frank, is here. So just cooperate closer and not to focus on building of new walls, which are also here. They are raising in Europe. And what I see as a politician is the most important is that we have to deliver something which is understandable to the Europeans, because they must touch it, they must feel it, they must see it, because our language sometimes it's really not very understandable to our voters, to our people.
I agree with Peter, but I think that all the solutions will not come from politicians. Responsibilities are shared between politicians and also CEOs of huge private companies and small entrepreneurs.
I think.
And I would like to say also that we can do both. Digital taxation and European digital giants. And both issues are linked, because when you have startups in France or in Germany or in any other member states, small startups with a level of taxation 40 points beyond Google, Amazon, and Facebook, you don't have the same chance of succeeding. That's why I'm so much advocating for a decision on digital taxation on internet giants by the end of this year, and I'm quite confident that we will be able
Minister,
to do so.
there's also a question there then of different VAT schemes. I mean, startups would list out a list of things that are wrong with the system.
Many questions behind, and to answer to the question just raised. First of all, there is a lack of capital. We need capital if we want our startup to scale up. We need a more integrated union. We need a capital market union. We need a banking union, because the size of the market is the critical point. So let's go this way of having a common market, an integrated common market, a banking union, for the sake of having a totally integrated market with 450 consumers with the same rules. And then you will see that our startups will be able to scale up. There is also a last question, which is the lack of cooperation among huge private companies all over Europe. Let's take the example of electric batteries. Germany is moving on this critical technique of electric batteries. France is moving on. Yeah. Everybody is moving on its own track, on its own way, and we are not able to find a better cooperation among our private companies. And I think it's up to Olaf and myself, but also up to the CEOs of those huge companies to find a way of a better cooperation. Otherwise, we will be able to rely on Chinese or American technologies.
I'm going to give the Vice Chancellor the word, since at some point a lot of this comes back to you in terms of the amount of agreement between the two big hitters in the Ministry of Finances of the two countries that matter right now.
I think we are on a good track, and I'm quite optimistic about the question of banking union and capital market union, because we defined the agenda, we know what we want to get, and most of the questions linked to the banking union could be solved this year, and we know what could be the results. We made a proposal which is very near to reality, and we try to convince anyone else, and I think we will succeed. So just to come to the question, and I would like to give two answers. The first is, yes, we have to do something to have really a single market in certain questions. And there is a lot of differences which are not too big and which could be solved, and we should do so. So in cases of information technologies and digitalization, I think there is something still to do, though there had been made a big progress, because I think that the privacy regulation we have from the European Union is not just regulating the questions, it's also forming a common market, because this is giving a European perspective to those dealing in that field. What we are to reach still is that there is no arbitrage in governance. This is something we should accept always, that it is not nice if a single authority is saying, if you go to my country, we will not look that strict to the rules. And this is something that could not happen in Europe, and it is our common case to avoid things like that. But there is something to do. And the second is, I would say, mostly to the private sector, but we have to discuss it together and to find a solution. And it's mentioned, 80% of financing companies in the United States is equity. In Europe and even in Germany, it's 20%. And this is a mistake. This is the biggest difficulty for our competitiveness in the world. Yes, there is public money, and we build funds, we support startups, we support seed financing, we support the growth financing. But this is modeling a capitalist market with no capitalists. So I'm absolutely unhappy about the fact that the money which is there in Europe and the people that are willing to invest money are not using the path which is common in the United States. And this is not the answer of our tax policies. It's not the question of regulation. We can discuss them and we can solve them, and we are all willing to. But if no one is willing to put his money into a new company, this is a mistake. Let me give you a successful German example. There is a company founded in Hamburg as a startup called MyTaxi, which is the European legal Uber. And it's really successful. But Uber got billions from equity markets without earning a single dollar. Or they earn some money, but not enough for paying it back so far. This company is earning money, but it had the chance to grow because at a certain stage, the German Telekom invested, and at the second stage, Daimler-Benz did so. But not 100,000 of millionaires and billionaires in Europe saying, this is the idea, and if I join this thing and we give them 5 or 6 billion monies, they will compete Uber. And this is what we have to change. And if you look at the big success stories of the digital companies in the United States, if you look at Microsoft at the beginning, if you look at Google, if you look at all the others, which are now named always, Airbnb, many of them had a long time without earning enough money for paying back what they got from the capital market. But there was trust that this could be a good idea, and there was a certain way of entrepreneurship from the financial market.
Vice Chancellor, are you suggesting that the European economy turn itself into some sort of a mirror image of the Americans in some way then? Because this is a banking economy at the end of the day versus a financial market run economy in the US.
But this is just this is something you can say. I think we need more equity, we need more money that is invested into new ideas and growing companies because there is an entrepreneurial style in investment. And this is not the task of a bank. A bank is not the one to give a credit to someone without being absolutely sure that they will get their money back. It must be something which is equity financing. This could be organized by banks as well, but it must be, it's a different task and a different story.
I'm going to give you a chance for a very short rebuttal and a question from the front to follow.
This is wonderful. I mean, this is a German Minister of Finance says that. This is dream. I'm really happy. It's a dream for me. It's the first time I heard that, because you said exactly the right thing. The problem is what you speak about is we need a capital market culture in Europe. We shouldn't go the American way, but if one day we can go 50-50, Europe would be a great place. The problem is I do not believe that we have a capital market culture, and it will be up to you and you to develop it. Because there are two countries in Europe that have a capital market culture. One is Switzerland, that has never been in the EU, and one is the UK that's about to leave. So there is a great responsibility. If you do that, I will, the first time in my life, I will only say nice things about politicians.
Oh, that's saying a lot.
We have to win the political battle, because that's exactly what we are doing in France, trying to build a capital market culture. And when you are doing so, you are being accused of making a policy for rich people. That's the key point.
That's a problem. That's why a Christian Democrat or a Social Democrat doesn't dare to mention the word capital. Because we have to, capital is pension funds. Pension fund, it's the people. In the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, we have no capital market. We get deposits and deposits and deposits on which we pay our clients nothing. If I could find a way on how can have the Slovaks participate in the success of the Slovak economy, it would be wonderful.
Well, let's move to a question from the front. Your name and a very short question and who you're addressing it to.
Milan Ježovica, a senior fellow Mesaten, Bratislava, Slovakia. I was very much intrigued by Mr. Minister's conditionality, saying that if the United States doesn't want to walk with us, then we should be more sovereign. And I know that this was a well-meant conditionality, and of course when we are in the mountains you understand that it's better to climb in pairs than alone. And it's also costly to become sovereign. But I'd like to push it a little bit more, and that is, shouldn't we become more sovereign because we need it, not because the United States doesn't want to walk with us? Should we become more competitive because it's our decision and we need to?
Mm-hmm.
We should be more competitive because it's our decision. We should be more successful because we developed the model of a social welfare economy that is successful on global markets, which is, I think, the European way of doing it. We should be successful because we understand that now learning that it is about politics when we discuss about the future of European Union, and it's not just regulation, market, and things like that, which are still important, but not the most important questions. But that I argued in the way I did, and you mentioned, is I'm still very much in favor of the common idea of democracy and rule of law, and the United States are our best friends. How else is it? And the people of the United States are also, and I'm a very transatlantic politician. So thinking about developing the European Union is not just because this might change. And doing it is not because we don't want to have, but also developing the European Union is not a way of competing others. It's what we do for ourselves, but we are still in an alliance with the United States. And we should not forget that this worked quite well for a long time, and that we have common grounds, and this is of biggest importance for the future of the world. And I think that there is a good chance that the American people are looking at the things very similar as we do.
Minister Limmer, I wanted to follow up on that with a question. What has your perspective been when you have dealt with Washington when it comes to the attitude, the kind of belief that you can have in talks, in closed-door talks with them, and when you look at them strike deals with Canada and Mexico after a lot of posturing, is what's happening with Europe similar to that, or do you see it escalating beyond control and then coming back to the point that we would have to be a little bit more sovereign and a little bit more self-reliant?
The US are, of course, our closest allies, and it will remain so. But I strongly believe that Donald Trump is the best incentive for a stronger Europe. Let's take 3 examples. First of all, trade. Donald Trump has decided to open a trade war, and he thinks that he will win that trade war. I think that nobody will win the trade war. But together we have been able to face the challenge posed by that decision from Donald Trump. And we had a common reaction due to the Commission, and thank you, Margaret Vestager, and thank you, Cecilia Malmström. Let's imagine that there would not be any Europe, and that every state would have gone to Washington trying to defend its case with Washington. We would have been destroyed. And it was exactly the contrary. Because we were together, we have been strong, and we have been able to face the decision of Donald Trump, and we have been able to obtain a change in the decisions of Donald Trump. So that's the first example that due to Donald Trump, Europe is stronger and is aware of the necessity of being stronger and more integrated. Second example, extraterritorial sanctions. We cannot accept to have that kind of attitude coming from Washington. And France strongly refuses any kind of extraterritorial sanctions. We are free to make trade with whatever state we want. And it's not up to Washington or to the United States, even if they are our closest allies, to decide whether we are allowed to make trade with Iran. And I'm deeply convinced that the outcome of that crisis with Iran will be the possibility for Europe to have its own independent financial institution so that we will be able to make trade with whatever country we want.
Mm-hmm.
Third example, the question of the relationship with China. Due to the attitude of Donald Trump, I think that we will promote free trade, we will promote new international institutions so that we will be in a situation to avoid a trade war between the US and China, and we will also tackle the key issues of intellectual property, access to the Chinese market, and so on. So I think that we should seize this opportunity of the current US administration, seize the opportunity of the aggressive attitude of Donald Trump to build a stronger Europe and to be more independent.
Deputy Prime Minister, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of your economy. If this trade war happens, and take out the supply chain, if you see any benefits for Slovakia when it comes to trade with the Chinese, does it open a door? Does it help Europe and your economy to open a door into the Chinese market that possibly hasn't happened till now?
Well, why
are you
just started with
optimistic or
Chinese
negative?
now at the moment? Just a little bit, I would like to mention on this USA, you know, and this trade war with that very humble mitigation to this potential conflict is that we just decided to buy new 14 fighters from USA, you know. And, you know, as a responsible member of NATO, we are going to double defense spending, you know, in coming years.
Mr. Trump is happy.
And just, I would like to raise this issue because, you know,
you should buy Rafale.
You should. we bought because we're cheaper and we achieve the highest value for money. But you know, that's a reality. We are going to increase the defense spending, and definitely, you know. And this is I think opportunity for Europe, you know, because okay, we are not pleased to pump the money out of Europe. I think it could be much better, you know, to focus in Europe on our capacities. And the PESCO is an excellent initiative in this area because we were again isolated in this world on this part of spending. And you know, I will end with Chinese, but on Brexit, for example, in my country this is a really slow paradox, but a little bit we are benefiting from the Brexit because I don't know if you know, but in this country we are going to launch the Jaguar Land Rover factory, the plant. Now our Indian, British friends invested more than £1 billion in this country as the first phase. Now we are working on the second phase. They decided to do it before Brexit referendum, but we were a little bit afraid after outcome of Brexit referendum. But the response from headquarters in New Delhi, from Tatra Group and from Birmingham was speed up, please speed up the investment. No. So this is, you know, do you see that this is a really different approach from our side? And on Chinese, you know, we see this wave of investment. Again, my country is the exception because we don't have a lot of investment from China. Other Visegrad 4 countries, I think they can be pleased much more. But I'm not sorry for that, you know, because I think what we need a high quality of investment, not just cherry picking and just investment where the transparency of money is the problem and a lot of issues. So we need a kind of regulation in this area. So So we are now not the tiger or leaders in this area, and the Chinese investors.
I think that brings up the question, since we're talking about Brexit, it brings up the question about banks. We come back to banks, we come back then to Italy, and in the examples that we can have of the strengthening of the banking system itself. I'm surprised that for about, let's say, 45 minutes, we haven't touched on one of the bigger concerns for the markets, which would be not just a potential trade war, but also what's happening in Italy. Where do you all come down on Brexit, Italy as domestic issues? Because they do reflect a little bit about the populism issues that we've seen really simmer.
I think we should be absolutely clear that there is in any country a responsibility for their own problems. And this is not a scandal, this is democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be aware that there's different elections, and I would like to tell you, Germany consists out of 16 states with a long tradition, more or less, raising a lot of money, having their own taxes, doing most of the state business in our country. And there is a lot of different colors in the different governments in Germany, and there is not a crisis because there is a change in government in one of the countries. And we have to deal with each other. And this is the same, and I think we could learn from that in the European Union. If there is a change in government, we should not be absolutely we should not start discussing if this is a problem or not. This will happen all the times, and we will always have to deal with different men and women ruling the countries, and if it is democracies, there will be changes as there were changes. And so this is how we have to...
But you're not worried at all that Italy is going to become another Greece? Because, of course, the stories are very different of the economies.
There is nothing like this which we could see. I think the big story about how we tackled the crisis is that in the end we helped the Irish Republic, we helped Portugal, we helped Spain, we helped Greece. Now anyone is out of the program, but we were able to do this within the Euro countries, which, and if you look at the small Greece, it was the biggest program which ever was developed for a single country in the world. Even the IMF never developed a program of this size. So we are strong and we are able to help each other if there is a need to. And the second is, we made a lot of progress in forming banking union, capital market union. Yes, there is urgency for doing more, and because of many reasons we are very hard working, especially the two of us or the three of us, to get this. But I think it is an Italian question, and if you have a lot of debt, you always have to be aware of the financial markets for financing your debt. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend to my people that it is worthwhile that we increase the public debt during the crisis 2008, 9 and 10 to 80% of GDP, and that we now decrease it down under 60%, and that we will decrease it more because we need the strength to be able to act in a crisis without being having the need to ask others for help and to look what the markets will say or so. And this is what we could recommend to others, but it's their decision whether they will do so or not. So I think calm down. And when the new government arose, we said, the president said they will stick to the European rules. The prime minister said he will stick to the European rules. The foreign minister said he will stick to the European rules. The finance and economy minister said he will stick to the European rules. And we have to take their words and not discuss if this might be so or so. We will see. So I'm not. We are looking at it. We are in. It is all our Europe. We are thinking about the future of Italy. We hope the best for the Italian people because we like them, and we are very happy to be together with them in our common European Union. And now it's their government to take the right decisions. Looking at the Brexit, I will not say too much things because we are on the last stages of trying to get an agreement. But I'm not.
Will we get an agreement?
I hope so, and let us be optimistic on such a nice site. But I think it was a mistake. It's also a warning to all of us in the European Union, because the big mistake that happened is the following. The people were angry about globalization, and they thought the European Union is the agent of globalization. But it is possibly our answer to tackle the problems of globalization. And this is something which we have to think about, and it has to do with the problems we discussed before. If we do not have political problems and stick to market rules, it will not be the answer for the people, and then they think that this is a problem. And so we have to change the way how we get progress in the European Union. It must be more politics, as it had been in the years before. And since we try to get an agreement, it's also the message we would to have a good neighborhood with the British people. They are big friends. But in the end, it is the big task then to form the European Union even more strict. As you might understand, 85% of GDP will be produced in euro afterwards. This will have an impact we cannot count. We cannot now reckon what it will be, but it will be.
I know we're running out of time, and I know we have so many questions. I have a whole diary full, which I've not even gotten to. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I do want to get the key points, a minute each, if you could, of what you would like to see accomplished, since we're talking about accomplishing something in the European Union, in the next 3 to 6 months. Andreas, what would you like to see actioned in the face of all that we face?
Well, from my point of view, it's very easy. I think we have to get Brexit behind us in hopefully a good way. And we have to solve the Italian problem. I think the language that is used from some of the politicians in Italy and also in other countries is just not appropriate anymore. We have to tackle that issue. And I quite frankly believe that this is an issue that will make the development of a banking union in Europe more difficult, because with that kind of government in Italy, to form a common depository scheme is not making it easier for the other countries. So this is very unfortunate. But I'm walking out of here full of joy, because I think one of the biggest issues for me is that we create a common capital market in Europe, in which we all join to finally be able to beat the Chinese and the Americans. I'd love that.
Deputy Prime Minister.
From my side, I'm the member of team of the Eurozone, so we would like to complete the banking union and focusing on ESM, backstop in ESM. I think we can...
In the next 3 to 6 months?
We can go for, yes, definitely. So we're working on that. So I do hope before Christmas we can come together with Mario Centeno will come, and with Olaf and Bruno, we can celebrate all together. This event, with EDIS, I do expect, I fully agree with Andreas that it's going to be much more difficult, because this is a level of trust about the depositors among the countries, and it's really and MPLs and all these issues are involved. So this is not the easiest way. Trade war, really, just to stay calm and to mitigate all possible and don't to irritate another waves of responses on that. And digital tax for us, this is something which can be, because we are talking a lot in Europe. We used to talk, this is very nice to talk, but we have to deliver. And this is something which we can explain to the people that this is fair, because we are talking about a fair taxation. Nothing. This is not. We are not going to penalize these companies for their success or for something like that. We just want a fair taxation, just on behalf of all taxpayers, because I think that's it.
Vice Chancellor, what would you like to see accomplished in the next 3 to 6 months?
There's a long story. I just will say I would appreciate very much if the participation rate in the European elections would be very high, because we try to form a democratic building, and it needs the people to take their decision.
Minister Le Maire.
So many things.
1 minute.
There are things to be completed. I mean, the Brexit, for instance. There are things to be delivered, capital market union, digital taxation, and there are things to be launched. I mean, for instance, a fund, a common European fund for disruptive innovation so that we can build on technological sovereignty. And the dream behind that is exactly the same as yours. I want Europe to be an independent political and economic continent as strong as China and the US. And I think that's feasible.
Minister Le Maire, Vice Chancellor, Deputy Prime Minister, Andreas, thank you all very much. Please give them a round of applause for their honesty. And give yourself a round of applause for sitting through it all. We'll have a 20-minute break before the next session begins. I think refreshments are across the hall.